the Taliban describes as the launch of its spring offensive.
Now in Spain, El País newspaper is splashing with the controversy surrounding Spain's King Juan Carlos. He's had emergency hip surgery after suffering a fall. This was during an elephant hunting trip in Botswana. One socialist politician is saying the time has come for the 74-year-old monarch to consider abdication.
And one of Google's co-founders, Sergey Brin, has given an interview to the Guardian newspaper here in the UK, warning that the Internet's original principles of openness and universal access are under greater threat than ever.
The business pages of the International Herald Tribune examine how the one-time technology giant Sony is now in a fight for its life.
The South China Morning Post says Beijing's decision to slightly ease control on its currency, the yuan, could be the first of other market liberalising fireworks.
And making British theatre history, the Daily Telegraph shows the 4 leading ladies of the musical Matilda, who are the youngest winners of the Olivier's Best Actress Prize. They're also in many other UK newspapers this morning as well.
Well, Bundeep Singh Rangar, chairman of IndusView, has kindly joined us to go through the papers this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, let's start with the Gulf news, shall we? And what we saw in Kabul yesterday, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's the beginning of the spring offensive by the Taliban, where the snow freezes out, the Panjshir Valley is open, and here comes the Taliban with a very symbolic attack, if nothing else, on key U.S. and foreign embassies, the parliament, etc., and apparently quite a successful one from their perspective. Yes, they got killed apparently this morning. All the attackers have been neutralized. But it sends a message out there that at the very heart of Afghan government in Kabul, they're vulnerable.
And there doesn't seem to be any real military objective, does there? It's more a declaration, a challenge, if you like, isn't it?
Well, it's a sign to say, look, they're not out with. The U.S. may have plans to retreat, and NATO may have plans to get out of there, but they're certainly doesn't mean that the Taliban has been put out of action. Maybe it's a ploy to get back to the discussion table and that political discussion that's coming out of the setting up of a consulate or whatever in Doha. That might be one angle, but it's not really the stated purpose right now.
Now let's have a look at the big story on the front page of the Spanish newspaper El País. King criticised after a breaking hip on elephant hunting trip. Needless to say, he didn't fall off an elephant. He actually
Are you sure?
tripped over. Well, apparently he didn't.
So is he being criticised for having broken his hip?
He fell on a step on his way to the bathroom when he was in Botswana on an elephant hunting trip. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that he's on a lavish holiday in Botswana when actually most of the Spanish people are really struggling and the economy could be on the verge of a bailout.
Well, Spain is heading to where Greece and Portugal were not so far back, with the highest unemployment rate in Europe, the debt to GDP going north of 60%, where they've typically been. 22% of Spain's unemployed, half the population below 30 is unemployed. And here you have the head of state, officially, the royal family, is out in safari in Africa. And that's where I think the contention lies, is that where are your priorities? And and where do the Spanish people choose to be there? In terms of who represents them for all matters of state.
I mean, once this accident happened, the article talks about the fact that he was flown home in a private jet and he had to be sorted out, etc., etc. I mean, it doesn't look good, does it, at all?
It doesn't. The question is, are austerity measures and tax cuts impacting them as well? And we're not very clear on that as yet. But it kind of belies the underlying tension here between where there is kind of landed gentry and privilege from there vis-a-vis creation of growth for the rest of the population.
But it's a very risky strategy, isn't it, for any leader not to chime in with the mood of the country.
And the Socialist Party, for the first time, has come out and criticized him for that. So I think there is definitely going to be some anger and some frustration.
And I must point out that I think of all safaris in Africa, Sal, Botswana is perhaps the most expensive.
And the most stunning in many...
And the most beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Moving on. The Guardian. Google. So the basic principles then of the internet, and that's universal access and freedom, are now under threat, says Sergey Brin. And now that's somebody who perhaps is not familiar to most of us.
Well, I had dinner with Sergey many years ago when Google was still an early
name dropper.
Well, it is
What
way
do you
back then. Great guy, and I think he's certainly right in terms of pointing out the internet as he inherited it, which was much more open, versus what is happening now, where what he refers to as, and the industry refers to as a walled garden approach, where you control what's there. Now, the reality is this a contention between web openness and web restriction by the government, which is what kind of he's saying in some ways, where freedom under pressure from the government, from various bodies like Hollywood industry associations trying to control content, or is he taking a kind of a underhanded slap at Facebook, which has a walled garden approach, and Apple, which also has a closed community between the hardware, software, and its iTunes users. So is it really against corporate agendas here, or a government agenda, and is one under the veneer of the other?
I mean, I was going to say, that looking at the article, I mean, you have to read very carefully, don't you, between the lines to see where this interview is directed at and who it's directed at. But it does hit the mark that everybody, whether they're working in corporate arena or just their own personal lives, we're all concerned, aren't we, about what it means when we put our own information on Facebook, Twitter, or anywhere else for that matter.
Absolutely, and to Google's credit,
and where it ends up.
And where it ends up, and to its credit, it pulled out of China when it faced, whatever censorship there. So it does have some legitimacy, and he does certainly have legitimacy saying, the internet's not where it was supposed to be when it started 30 years ago.
And so, does he say that control is a good thing or not?
No, he thinks it should be much more open, because I think what he's saying is if Google had to start trying to tap into the Facebook community would be almost impossible, because it's not an open-ended architecture. To get into the Facebook community requires you to go through Facebook, which is kind of the gateway and guardian for community users. That should be open. That's the sort of inheritance of the internet when it started.
Moving on to the New York Times and Sony, it's quite remarkable, isn't it? I mean, this probably follows on from the Guardian story, but Sony have definitely lost their place as the brand leader.
We're talking about companies that missed out on the internet revolution and the mobile revolution, right? So Motorola,
or even the digital revolution. I mean, I'm thinking of Kodak here.
Absolutely, and think of Walkmans, which were very famous back in the mid '80s. And Sony's market cap back in a decade ago was thrice what it is today, and now it's sitting at like 1/30th of where Apple is, and so you've got Apple that has become, with their iPod and subsequently the iPhone, et cetera, taken on the digital revolution. Sony's just not innovated, and I think part of the culture in Japanese corporate culture not to innovate in the same way that Silicon Valley allows it is partly to blame.
Question is, will this new chief, Kazuo Hirai, who has been in charge of a very important part of the business and turn that bit of the business around, whether he will be able to sort out Sony? Because of course, a big story about Sony was when Howard Stringer became CEO, a Welshman,
that's right,
non-Japanese, to be in charge of a big Japanese corporate, I think the first for a long time.
And I think he was great as a corporate manager, but not as an innovator. And as Sun Microsystems co-founder says, Bill Joy, innovate or die. And I think basically that's what's happening with Sony. The new CEO, of course, it's a great time to come in, slash 6% of the workforce, 10,000 jobs. But at the end of the day, aside from the PlayStation, where is their next growth story? And that's where I think the key new product developments around the mobile and internet and digital entertainment will be washed up for closely, because that's where Apple and Samsung are winning out.
Moving on to the South China Morning Post, and are the Chinese responding to the criticism, which has been pretty loud and pretty consistent for a long time now?
Well, yes, they're widening the trade range, and therefore from 0.5% to 1%. And I think that's interesting because it allows some of the criticism against the convertibility of the currency to be attacked. At the same time, of course, it allows them to control inflation better. But more importantly, or more interestingly, is the timing, because you've got the IMF meeting, the G20 meeting in Washington, D.C., certainly the World Bank president appointment announcement today. So in light of all that, here's a posturing move and a real move from China's point of view. But the timing, I think, is almost more important than just the move itself.
Also as well, I mean, there's so much pressure on China from outside for it to do this, but for China itself, if it did allow its currency to move more freely, it would help it, wouldn't it, control its own issues within, like inflation?
Well, certainly that's one big reason why they had to have high interest rates locally to combat inflation. So by giving a wider trading line of currency, they get another tool in their toolkit. But keep in mind, they do want to have a lower currency, because that allows for them to export in a time when Chinese GDP slowed down a bit, still 8.1%, the envy of the world, but it's less than 10% or 12% they were having some time ago.
Okay, the Daily Telegraph has a picture that is, as you pointed out.
I have not.
You've not been yet, Bundeep.
All the British papers have got this. Now, these 4 lovely girls.
The youngest is 10.
That's right, and they are the winners of the Olivier Award for Best Actress. More importantly, I think, or more generally, perhaps, what is the resonance for you, for instance, of Roald Dahl books? Because I mean, I've certainly grown up with Roald Dahl books.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you?
I think there's a sort of universal values that it kind of exports and people resonate with. And I think that's one reason why they got 7 Oliviers out there.
But did you grow up on them or not?
I didn't
I know
per
you
se.
didn't grow up in the UK, did you?
I didn't per se, no. And I actually discovered it more recently. What I found also interesting, by the way, is that how they had to work 2 girls at a time for shifts because there were child labor laws preventing
Absolutely.
4 to work at the same time. And that's really cute.
Bundeep, thank you very much indeed. Bundeep Singh Rangar of IndusView joining us for the papers this morning.
Bye-bye. See you soon.